On Landline today, from growing citrus to medicinal cannabis, we visit one of the country's biggest outdoor cannabis crops.
The plants that we're standing next to here, I think, went in on about 21st of December. They're a very aggressive growing plant. They're fed ripe.
Australian scientists fighting back against the destructive fall armyworm.
Well, in comparison with the last 2 years, this year's been horrendous.
And the Indigenous community breathing new life into an ancient trade, harvesting sea cucumbers in Shark Bay.
Basically what we're doing there is we're getting trawled behind the boat, pretty much like live bait, and we're looking on the seafloor for cucumbers.
Hello, I'm Pip Courtney. Welcome to the program. It's 4 years since the destructive pest, the fall armyworm, arrived in Australia. Its impact on sweet corn, maize and sorghum crops in the last year is the worst on record. Scientists have mobilised to attack the grub on several fronts, using insecticides, beneficial bugs and gene technology. Landline Selena Bachkowski looks at the potential control solutions.
The past year has seen the worst infestation of fall armyworm since it invaded Australian crops in 2020. Not a worm, but a caterpillar with a voracious appetite for sweet corn, maize and sorghum.
So there are those 4 spots that are, you know, so characteristic in a large larva like this. They get much bigger and darker and a bit more raised, and it's got spots all the way along the body, but those really stand out as they get bigger.
And that's the indicator for farmers that they've got fall armyworm?
Yeah, if unfortunately you get larvae this big, it's quite easy to identify them.
It's affected crops across Australia.
Well, in comparison with the last 2 years, this year's been horrendous. We were seeing high pressure in November, December that we hadn't seen before January, February in previous years. And, you know, I guess we can only imagine that because there's not enough work being done to understand whether they're being blown in or whether there are non-crop hosts that they're building up on. We just don't really know. We expect that both of those things are probably part of the picture.
Dr Melina Miles from the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries is working on this test site in southeast Queensland.
Don't trip over the irrigation pipe.
Here, they're growing 3 main crops affected by fall armyworm to understand the caterpillar and control its impact.
That one's been there for a while.
Oh, wow,
you can see it's quite,
The highly invasive fall armyworm originated in the Americas. It has the ability to travel long distances on the wind, making it a potentially catastrophic pest for the crops it targets. It's not known how it came to Australia, but unlike places like the United States, Australia has its own unique set of issues.
We've learned a lot, particularly with sorghum. I've been learning a lot about the yield penalties with fall armyworm. Maize is always a bit more clear-cut with the damage.
At the trial field, Dr Joe Eyre and the team are focusing on developing guidelines to help growers decide if and when to take action. This involves a combination of methods like monitoring, beneficial insects and targeted insecticides to control fall armyworm populations effectively. And this season, they had no shortage of fall armyworm to experiment on.
This is a really great venue for us because we have such high pressures of fall armyworm. So with our trials here, we're able to allow a natural infestation to occur. We don't have to go to the extra effort of trying to inoculate. We've had a natural increase in the levels of fall armyworm. We can use that information to develop relationships to predict a fall armyworm infestation into the crop at different levels of infestation and at different times, and how that affects the size of the canopy. Then we can predict how that reduction in canopy size is likely to impact yield, not just here, but also in other environments like Western Downs, where water more frequently reduces yield than radiation.
Joe's team is focusing on the timed use of insecticides on maize and sorghum and when to apply, at the 4-leaf, 6-leaf, 8 or 10-leaf stage of development. They're using insecticide at levels which would be cost prohibitive to farmers and probably not great eating to find the most economic method. With these sorghum plants, for example, Joe's getting close to rolling out an effective model to farmers. So if you were to summarise this for a farmer, what's the takeaway?
That canopy reduction is not necessarily going to cause a yield loss in all environments. At least in the seedling stage, they need to be protected. Once they've got 6 leaves, they seem to be able to survive.
And it's a similar story with the maize and insecticides, with a fairly stark outcome when comparing cob sizes.
So this cob has been from a crop that was infested at 4 leaves. It had 2 to 3 fall armyworm in each plant from when it had 4 leaves to when it had 12 leaves. Then, from 12 leaves, we got rid of the infestation and maintained it throughout. You can see this here. We've had some direct chewing on the cob, but more importantly is that this massive reduction in the size of the cob is because there simply wasn't the canopy there to grow a big cob.
Jeez, it looks terrible.
By no means was it able to fill that cob.
And is that direct munching there too, or is that just the way the cob's grown?
That's just the way it's grown. So all of these have aborted because there wasn't enough photosynthesis, because there wasn't enough canopy there to intercept the light, to turn into sugars to fill those grains.
While the insecticides are doing part of the job, there are still a lot of unknowns. Integrated pest management, or IPM, is another method being trialled to find control solutions.
In terms of IPM, I guess we've got a bit of a way to go to convince them that some of these things can be incorporated and will add value rather than create a greater risk. So if you pull back from spraying insecticides, you want to be sure that you've got something else to fill that gap. So it's a real chicken and egg thing with IPM in sweet corn, because you want to create a gap that natural enemies can fill, but you don't want that gap to be so big that fall armyworm causes damage.
Dan Papacek has been working with bugs or integrated pest management for the past 45 years.
I became very aware, of course, when fall armyworm first became a new invasive species here, and we were already producing little wasp parasitoids for sort of closely related moth pests, and I guess we were also always sort of a little bit interested in whether anything we were doing might be part of the big picture of trying to find a solution.
And is it?
Well, there's a lot we've yet to learn, but a lot of the work Melina's been doing has been really encouraging, I would say. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of potential.
He's providing the beneficial insects to target fall armyworm before they even hatch.
At the moment, we're releasing a tiny little wasp, incredibly tiny little wasp. You can virtually not see it with your naked eye, and it lays its eggs into the eggs of the moths. And the idea is to encourage biological control as much as we can, and as part of that we aim to minimise the use of pesticides.
The University of Southern Queensland is also collaborating with Queensland DAF. Dr Alison McCarthy and Professor Robbie Girling are focusing on possible parasites affecting the fall armyworm.
That work is really looking at developing camera systems to be able to identify where parasitoids are moving around, so the small insects that feed on other insects, in this case they're egg parasitoids, so they're feeding on the eggs of the fall armyworm, and to really understand what the distribution is in the field, how effective those natural enemies are at controlling the pest, and really being able to then give some advice to growers to really understand what management practices they need to put in place in order to be able to benefit from these natural enemies.
This is our first trial with the cameras this season, so it's been about 2 months. So quite early stages in our research, and initially we are validating and developing the system, which involves an in-field camera, watching an egg mass and watching for any of those natural enemies visiting the egg mass. We see this as potentially being a tool for the industry to be able to automatically and real-time assess those parasitoid levels and levels of natural enemies.
Battle plans to control fall armyworm are not just happening in the paddock. At the Queensland University of Technology, Dr. Julia Belay and a small team are using RNA interference, which makes the plants deadly to the pest.
It's a technology where you can silence a gene in the insect by expressing something into the plants.
And what are the results?
So far, the results are very promising.
Julia, can you give me a very simplified version of what's going on here, please?
Yeah, so these are transformants. We've transformed the plants with a technology that will kill the insect when the insect will come and feed on the plants. And when the insect come and feed on the plants, the insect most likely will die.
So you are targeting insects and trying to kill them. It's not about fertility or anything like that?
Some of our technology, because they are targeting different genes, will have a different effect. But yeah, we want complete killing of the insect.
They are hoping to manufacture an environmentally friendly anti-parasitic treatment using an Australian native plant. Do you think there is a world where we can see the eradication of fall armyworm?
I hope there is. It will be difficult, but I think if we, put all our efforts and, the combination of different methods to, control the insect, I think there is a possibility, yes.
There's all this work learning about fall armyworm and the best way to combat them being done by scientists in field trials. The next step is to get that information to farmers and industry groups. And that's what's being done here today.
The purpose of this event is really to bring everyone together to discuss the research that has been underway in the interim. Last time we met was over 3 years ago.
Industry bodies, agronomists and other interested groups attended to hear what progress had been made on research.
There's a lot of rehashing of what we knew, but they've progressed. I guess one new thing was having grains here as well. So having grain and the grain industry and horticulture together is a big step forward, working together and collaborating together. So that's really important.
There's a lot to do. The team, the researchers, everything have done a great job so far. But yeah, there's a long way to go.
I've learnt that there's some really good things coming down the pipeline in regards to biological and biorational controls. That's really promising to see because we know that chemistry has a pretty limited lifetime, especially when you start to consider some of the resistance issues that we see.
Because they burrow down.
After 4 years of infestation, Joe says farmers and agronomists still have to realise this pest works differently to those they are used to.
There is no precedent for coming and checking plants at this stage. No one has had to open up those worlds to look inside to find bugs, which is a very onerous, time-consuming thing that we need to do because damage doesn't mean there's a fall armyworm still in there. It can mean it's gone.
The main source of drinking water in South Australia's Eyre Peninsula is expected to be depleted by next year if current extraction rates continue. A desalination plant is proposed for Port Lincoln to replace it. If built, it will draw water from bays which support a thriving mussel industry. And as Evelyn Leckie reports, that has locals worried.
Dawn in Port Lincoln sees mussel farmers bringing in their catch. Yumba Mussel Holdings harvests up to 40 tonnes of native blue mussels a week from the sheltered waters of Boston and Proper Bay, 22 kilometres away. The mussels are iced as soon as they're brought on board.
Mark, show us, is that a good size?
Yep, so what we do here is we always harvest the mussel, what's the fattest mussel. So it's what you eat is inside of it.
Company General Manager Mark Andrews says Yumba contributes to about 60% of Australia's mussel production, with an annual turnover of $20 million. Its success can be attributed to natural larvae floating in surrounding protected bays.
I moved here for one reason, and that was the natural spat. Port Lincoln is so unique at the numbers of natural spat larvae that spawn and settle from May through to September every year.
But he says his business is at risk from a proposed desalination plant to be built at Billy Lights Point in Port Lincoln. Its intake and discharge pipes are expected to reach out into the surrounding waters of Boston and Proper Bays that the business relies on.
My main concern about a desalination plant that has an intake that takes up 5 gigalitres of water per year is what they're talking initially. A percentage of that spat will go on the intake. What percentage? Nobody can determine that.
The company's operations manager, Andy Dyer, shares Mark's concerns. He's checking on the crews who harvest mussels from one of the company's 24 sites.
Howdy, Tomo. What up, looking good? Yeah, it's not bad, actually. Yeah.
The prized mussel spat settles and grows on ropes left out at sea. Tonight, this haul will be shipped to Adelaide, then interstate, and also onto international destinations like Singapore, Hong Kong and Dubai. Andy and his wife launched the mussel farming industry in Port Lincoln more than 25 years ago.
We established that there were natural mussels in the bay. They were attached to yacht club moorings. They were attached to some of the early tuna farming cages. So we decided that we would take the plunge and try and develop a mussel industry here. And to date, it's been, I think, quite a success story for Port Lincoln.
He's concerned about SA Water's proposed project being placed so close to a thriving aquaculture zone.
We can't say whether a desalination plant is going to affect the mussel sediment, but neither can they. So from an aquaculture perspective, we always have to do things under the precautionary principle.
Marine scientist Paul McShane has been consulting Yamba on SA Water's latest plans for a desal plant. He says the unknowns about mussel larvae movement lead to a risk that can't be quantified.
On the smaller scale, in terms of the proximity of the desal plant to the mussel growing area, we don't know what the impact will be. There's certainly going to be an impact, we just don't know what the level of it is.
Port Lincoln's Deputy Mayor says the council does not support the project's location, and many concerns from the community have been communicated to council.
Their concerns are the risk for the aquaculture industry that is based here on the bay. The aquaculture industry is one of the biggest employers in the area, employing directly and indirectly about a quarter of the population, or closer to half probably. And what we've got is those concerns about, are we putting an industry that is a sustainable food source at risk?
Bungala traditional owners of the region have also voiced opposition to the project but declined to comment. And time is running out for SA Water to provide reliable drinking water for the Eyre Peninsula. Water supply issues were identified from the late 2000s.
Today, Port Lincoln heavily relies on the Yulee South Basin for its water. About 75% of the region's water is drawn from this underground source, and that's where we're headed to now.
Water is drawn up from the basin through these pipes and pumped back into tanks that store water for the residents. It's predicted the basin will be depleted next year, with increased salinity already detected in some of the production bores. And the region's Landscape Board has recently announced it's urgently reviewing its water allocation plan, which is why SA Water argues the plans for the desalination plant should go ahead. It would take around a year to build, and if the project is delayed, it says it would have to consider staged water restrictions.
We are seeking to build a desalination plant in order to protect the water security of the Eyre Peninsula, to ensure that the customers of today have water, but also we can continue to support the customers of the future.
SA Water's Peter Seltzikis is showing what a desalination plant looks like on a much larger scale. He says Port Lincoln's proposed desalination plant would have minimal risk to the mussel industry.
The studies that we've done recognise that there is less than 0.1% chance of mussel spat in the bay being entrained within the intake of the desalination plant.
But the mussel industry is wary of the studies carried out by SA Water and the state's Research and Development Institute, saying risk could not entirely be ruled out, and the plans have been rushed through now the Yuli Basin is in stress. Mark Andrews is well aware of the water security issues, but says alternatives should have been considered earlier.
So Mark, if you hold this process up, we're going to have to put water restrictions on the lower Eyre Peninsula. Well, it's not my fault. You know, I've been around doing my thing. You've been around for a long time, a lot longer, looking for water security and locations before now. So what have you been doing all this time?
SA Water says it's already considered over 20 sites in the region.
We have been through an extensive process of review and we're very focused on delivering a desalination plant as soon as we possibly can to ensure the water security of the Eyre Peninsula.
I've set up this business, employed 76 people and invested a lot of money with the leading shellfish mussel farmer, grower, marketer in Australia. We're leading in all the areas of new product development and everything else. I can't afford for any risk to my business.
A development application for the desalination plant is expected to be submitted by mid-year.
Coming up later in the show.
Hello, I'm Sean Murphy, reporting from the waters of Shark Bay in Western Australia. How sea cucumbers could play a vital role in the growing carbon economy.
And it's a sort of closed loop. Seagrass meadows grow more, they refertilise, and it just keeps on going. So you get more sea cucumbers and more seagrass.
The loss of grass affects the dolphins here, their food source. Sharks, stingrays, everything depends on the grass.
Hi, I'm Kath Sullivan. DNA testing has confirmed invasive fire ants found at a southern Queensland Army base are linked to an existing Brisbane infestation, prompting calls for an audit of all defence land. Queensland Premier Stephen Miles has told Parliament compliance and tracing investigations are ongoing, but the ants found at Oakey, west of Toowoomba, were from an existing biosecurity zone.
I'm advised that the ants arrived in the area from a turf farm within the southeast Queensland infestation zone.
The Invasive Species Council says more than 100 nests have been confirmed at the base, located in the Condamine-Ballon River system, prompting fears the aggressive and devastating ants could spread throughout the Murray-Darling Basin. Until recently, it was considered Australia's largest dairy farm. Now the remaining slice of Woolnorth in northwest Tasmania is up for sale. It follows years of controversy, including allegations of animal cruelty, mismanagement, and the loss of a major contract to supply Fonterra earlier this year. In a deal approved by then Treasurer Scott Morrison, Chinese-owned Moon Lake Investment purchased the farm for $280 million in 2016, trading as Van Dairy. At the time of the sale, the farm was milking almost 18,000 cows over more than 7,000 hectares, with plans to expand and sell fresh milk into China. But that part of the business was never realised, and recently parcels of land have been sold off. Demand for Pacific Island seasonal workers is falling after a post-COVID boom in numbers, and it might be backpackers that are taking their place. New figures from the Development Policy Centre show a 10% drop in demand, or about 3,000 workers, across the farm sector during the 9 months to February. Under the Pacific Labour Scheme, from July 1, employers need to guarantee 30 hours of work per week for seasonal workers for the duration of their stay. And Beef 2024 is kicking off in Rockhampton against the backdrop of a recovery in cattle prices, an intense focus on margins across the food supply chain, and the industry's ambitious carbon neutrality goals. To mark the event, a new report from ANZ shows the importance of ensuring the cattle industry works as a whole to share the costs of carbon abatement.
The sooner a farm business is able to demonstrate the natural capital characteristics and the way the farm business comes together for all of its ESG credentials, the better place they will be for a future world.
Beef only happens every 3 years and has become one of the largest events held in regional Australia. More than 115,000 visitors are expected to attend this year. And finally today, a top-end teenager has reeled in the most lucrative catch in the country, winning the main prize of the Northern Territory's $1 million fish competition. Thanks to a 67-centimetre barramundi caught on the Katherine River, 19-year-old fisher Keegan Payne is now a millionaire.
Well, I'm buying a new boat, the Savo, and maybe the Savo and a new car.
It's the first time in the competition's 9-year history that the $1 million fish has been caught.
He turned it around and then there was a tag and it was like, no way, no way. And then he was jumping around, screaming.
For the family of 8 siblings from Katherine, the money is life-changing.
It's pretty hard going for us at the moment with money, but yeah, now with $1 million, we don't have to complain about it.
I want him to buy me a new rod.
It's a great story, and that's Landline News.
In South Australia's Riverland, citrus trees have been removed to make way for the planting of one of Australia's biggest outdoor cannabis crops. With more than 1 million Australians using medicinal cannabis since it was legalised, we have one of the fastest growing markets in the world, but not many producers. Renmark reporter Eliza Burlage met one, and his backstory prompted the move from citrus to cannabis.
These workers are harvesting medicinal cannabis at one of the very few outdoor growing sites in Australia. Once harvested, the sun-grown crop is dried indoors before it's ready for processing. This is Medtech Farmers' secure facility in South Australia's Riverland region, one of the country's biggest cannabis farms.
A lot of actually THC is actually growing in the market a lot more and being a lot more accepted, which is...
Managing Director Brad Gallard says it's taken 5 years to get here and he's yet to make a cent.
Even though the plant does grow fast, it's been a long journey to get to this point. But exciting now, we're pulling down and we're going all down into the clean rooms and preparing the product, ready to be packed to go out to pharmacies. So we're certainly we're excited about this point in time. Now these will be 8 weeks in flower. High THC strain.
The third-generation citrus grower is convinced his foray into medicinal cannabis will pay off. Less than 6 months ago, this facility was just a patch of soil after citrus trees were cleared.
Plants that we're standing next to here, I think, went in on about 21st of December. They're a very aggressive growing plant. They're fed right. We are all organic here too. We're feeding them a lot with organic pretty much every day. You know, obviously the sunlight here, the heat, you keep the water up. They also love the heat, but if you want to keep the water up. We were chasing our tail a little bit. We didn't have irrigation in here in November, so it was game on since we got our licence and approvals, in September.
The region is better known for citrus and wine grapes. But with the wine industry in crisis due to an oversupply, it's seen as vital that new industries like this develop to provide new opportunities for the area to diversify.
Smells good too.
Serena Lange hadn't even graduated university when she was chosen for a role with Medtech.
Was it ever a job you thought about doing growing up? Absolutely not, but it's very exciting. There's so much learning to be done. It's a constant learning journey and we're forever experiencing new parts of the process and improving our practices on site.
The agribusiness graduate is one of about 30 staff employed at the operation. Site manager Derek Fitzner is also new to the world of cannabis cultivation, but has worked with Brad before at a juice company.
I was involved with Brad in a beverage startup project, so we've got a working history.
Derek says as the site grows, it will offer more job opportunities.
Somewhere between the 50 and the and 100 people is something that has the potential, and that's across the entire business, not just in cultivation, but across all aspects of the business.
So far, 3 hectares of medicinal cannabis have been planted here in South Australia's Riverland, but there's plans to expand that to 10 hectares to grow more of this in-demand crop for harvest next year.
For Brad, the decision to push ahead with a multi-million-dollar investment in a new crop is personal.
My parents got a bit ill from my father's Parkinson's disease. My mum had scleroderma and ulcers, and tried a bit of the product, just after it was sort of legal, and saw a reasonable result for at least a few days. So I thought I'd better look into it.
The latest figures from the Therapeutic Goods Association show about 1.2 million Australians have accessed medicinal cannabis since it was legalised in 2016.
Seeing the results of people and how they get through and how it helps them, there's no doubt that there is a big uptake going on with medicinal cannabis in Australia, especially at the moment.
MedTech Pharma is not only growing cannabis outdoors. The company also has indoor grow rooms and plans to build a lab to develop new strains to grow from seed to shelf. The mother room is where the team nurtures the female cannabis plants, which cuttings and clones are taken from.
So Derek, these plants are so green and bright and leafy. What's the thermostat read like?
So at the moment, we're feeling it, and what people often say is what we feel in temperature is what the plants also feel. So if it's too hot for us, it's too hot for them, too cold for us, too cold for them. At the moment, as we stand here, it's a perfect 24 degrees at about 80% humidity. They're looking nice and green because they've obviously got a really nice balance of all of those elements, as well as a nutrient and irrigation regime going on.
The majority of the more than 24 varieties of cannabis plants grown here have THC cannabinoids, the psychoactive compound which can be smoked as a flower or ingested as an edible. CBD, more commonly used for oils and tinctures, does not create a high feeling for users.
They are both relevant to the medicinal space. In simple terms, there are particular CBD strains, for example, that are very centred on sleep and epilepsy, for example. But across both CBD and THC, there are specific strains and varieties that people have a preference for with their pain management, with their anxiety, with their sleep issues.
We've got several different strains in here. How important is your record keeping and your monitoring?
Yeah, traceability is huge throughout the entire production process, right from the genetic stock with the mother plants here in the mother room through to production purposes and then eventually harvesting as well. We record keep the entire process.
And do you grow in here from seed?
Yes, we have some seedlings growing in here, yes, and then eventually they get to an age where we can take clones from the plants.
But it's clear licensing and security to grow a pharmaceutical-grade cannabis product can be a lengthy process.
There's a lot of commitment and a lot of years of wait. Obviously, you're dealing with the Office of Drug Control and it's a narcotic drug, so you have to be, very tight security and obviously then to ramp up and get going and to understand everything that the industry needs as well to supply this pharmaceutical drug.
Australia has one of the fastest growing medicinal cannabis markets in the world, but only about 50 licensed growers. Research scientist and industry advocate Emily Rigby launched the Australian Cannabis Cultivators Group last year to help producers grow the domestic supply.
I think there's a huge potential for us around Australia, and because we're able to provide jobs, I really think we do need to see the government get a little bit more behind the Australian industry to help this emerging industry while we are learning and while we've got competition from imports. But I think Australia's got a really great position if it's done in a clever way with efficient production methods.
Once more Australian cultivators bring it online, the price will come back, which is great, and people will become more efficient at growing the product. And then once the volumes come out there and the doctors are able to, learn how to prescribe it and the uptake will be better, it's still on a very, very fast growth.
For Brad, starting up a seed-to-shelf plant medicine company from scratch is just the latest venture for the risk-taking former citrus grower. He's also raced regularly and won the iconic Finke Desert Race near Alice Springs.
What was scarier, driving in the Finke Desert Race or starting a new crop like this in the time frame you've got?
Probably a bit of both, actually. So maybe a bit nervous on a few things on both, but certainly this has been a lot of our life. Really engulfed us. But it's been exciting and it's been a great journey, and we're looking forward to the things to come.
G'day, I'm Matt Brand. Northern Australia's wet season is officially over, and if we look at the rainfall map, you can see most of the north enjoyed an above average season, with some record rain through parts of the territory, but sadly cattle stations along the WA coast missed out. So that's the rainfall map, but what about the grass? Well, these satellite fodder maps have been put together by Aussie company SIBO Labs. The company's Alastair Rayner says most regions in the north have had really good pasture growth, and the Barkly has bounced back after those huge bushfires last year.
I've been watching the Barkly fairly closely, and I think that's been a really interesting little story in terms of that. And I think reflecting back to the end of the dry season, we had those huge, enormous fires that happened through there and on a phenomenal scale. And that probably made a lot of people very nervous about how this season might have sort of played out, because if the wet hadn't have happened, where would we be in terms of going into a dry season for 2024? And what we've actually seen has been, pretty consistent rainfall. It's pushed down across most of that Barkly region, and you'll see that green progression over the months as we go. I think the other thing that's really useful to note is as you look at those maps, you'll see where that rainfall and that flow of water has progressed down through those channels and those feeder channels. So out of the Gulf, flowing down through Western Queensland and down into South Australia. So there's a lot of feed is really happening across that channel country and in that Western Queensland parts as well. It's reinforcing what people are saying when I'm talking to them and when I'm in those areas. They say what a great season has been, and we're seeing that feed reflecting on that.
So heading now into May, Alastair, what do you think the cattle industry should get from these maps in terms of forward planning?
Look, there's a couple of things that I think about a lot, and I think about two things. One is that we're going to have a reasonably good feed base to plan forward. So there's probably a lot of people who can look at that and maybe make some good plans around what first round muster might look like and what we could probably expect potentially in terms of weights from some of those cattle. Also, I think then is how we might utilise some of that feed better for some of those cows that are in lower body condition to try and give them an opportunity to access maybe better feed if that's possible, build those body conditions up and actually get some good reconceptions. But also it might mean that, we're going to have a bigger bulk of feed that will die off. So how do we use that dry feed? Do we need to think about some supplement strategies ahead of time so we're not chasing supplements when everyone else is, and be, forward planned and actually get it when it's a cheaper option? So, there are tools there now that are incredibly powerful for locations.
That's Alastair Rayner from SIBO Labs. The big wet season has delayed mustering in a number of areas, but most stations are now getting stuck in, although I'm told there's still a lot of motorbikes getting bogged in the north. In the live export trade, prices out of Darwin Port have eased slightly as more cattle become available and demand from Indonesia remains solid. In the domestic market, prices for slaughter-type cattle kicked, and the latest export data from MLA shows beef exports are up 46% compared to last year. The biggest customers in April were the US, followed by Japan, South Korea, China and Indonesia. Sheep and lamb sales returned to Wagga this week, which influenced the national indicators in a positive way. Restock of lambs up 16%. The wool market retracted this week with prices falling across all types, especially at the finer end, and this was despite the smallest offering since early March. Now, the organisation that represents dairy processors claims farmers in Australia are being paid above the global average for their milk by as much as 30%. But it would seem this premium is about to be slashed. Saputo wrote to its suppliers this week saying that it expects opening farmgate milk prices next month will be reduced to factor in market volatility and ensure that Australian dairy products remain competitive. Chicago wheat futures eased this week, but in the domestic market, wheat prices went up across most port zones. There was some handy rain in WA, but a lot of growers there are desperate for more. Large parts of South Australia remain dry. Cotton futures fell this week, but the bidding war for Australia's largest cotton processing company heated up, with both Louis Dreyfus and Olam Agri upping their bids to buy Nemoy cotton. Here's a look at Nemoy's share price, which has doubled in the last 6 months as the bidding between Louis Dreyfus and Olam has intensified. And that is the Landline check on prices. Keep it rural.
Long before European settlement, there was a thriving trade between Indigenous communities in northern Australia and Indonesians searching for sea cucumber. Now, in Shark Bay in Western Australia, the local Mulgunna people have revived the trade, and they're hoping they'll revive their community in the process. Landline's Sean Murphy has the story.
In the World Heritage listed waters of Shark Bay in Western Australia, the Eagle One is heading to harvest sea cucumbers. What makes the crew unique is that they're Indigenous, and they're continuing a trade to Asia that existed centuries before European settlement. Skipper Sean Moose McNear has been a professional fisherman and diver all his adult life. But first and foremost, he's a Mulgunna man.
Be proud of who we are here, saltwater people. Whittier people, we're Mulgunna. This place we call Gatheraguru here is not just a place of tourism or a place to visit for us, it's our home. So, like anywhere in your home environment, it's really important to look after. We say here, culture first, family first, and business after. So our priorities here are culture and family, which is what we are, but also to juggle that business end of things.
It may be an ancient trade, but this crew uses modern technology to record the wonders of their traditional country. Drones, GoPros, even mobile phones are used to capture and share the incredible biodiversity of the bay.
Every trip we always try and use the technology that we have, the drone and the cameras and stuff, to make sure that we record biodiversity changes, adaptations, different water movements, conditions. It's always, picture tells 1,000 words.
Divers Alex Dodd and Cheyenne Nassette are Mulgunna men, but like many, they've lived away from the bay. Working for Tidal Moon has brought them home physically and spiritually.
It means a lot for me to be able to come back here. I was born and raised in Geraldton, so I never really grew up in the bay. To come back as an adult and actually start looking after the place and learning a lot about it, it means so much more than having that respect for it and being able to do all that kind of stuff and learning from my elders and all that, to take in that knowledge.
Tidal Moon was granted a special Indigenous fishing licence in 2017. It's a wild harvest, but the crew try to treat the sea like a farm, harvesting paddocks and then resting them on rotation.
We don't want to take them all from one spot. We know they're a slow-moving creature, so we try to disperse our range of where we're taking our wild stock from.
Although they're trained as master divers, in shallow waters the Tidal Moon team doesn't use tanks. They trawl on a line behind the boat.
So basically what we're doing there is we're getting trawled behind the boat, pretty much like live bait, and we're looking on the seafloor for cucumbers. So sometimes they're in between the debris, the coral, or the seagrass. So it takes a bit of a fine-tuned eye to be able to see them. But once you get the knack of it, it comes pretty naturally.
The catch is also known as trepang or bêche de mer. The name sea cucumber is a misnomer. They're actually an animal.
It's identified as a fish. It has all the organs, all the operations as a normal, I suppose, animal, but no brain. It doesn't have a brain. So it's very interesting. It's a defence mechanism, like squid does with the ink. These things spit all their guts out.
Wow, look at that.
He's under stress right now.
Wow.
And he's going to spit all his guts out, but he can grow it all back again.
And I can feel his body contracting. Look at that. It's like a sponge that's completely...
He'll go a bit harder now, back to shape.
Yeah.
In the shop, but put him back in the salt water and he's fine.
Tidal Moon sells its catch into the specialty food market. It's twice cooked and dried in a process that can take 10 to 12 days.
So this is where we leave this is where our end product ends up.
The company's Chief Executive Officer, Michael Weir, says the product is highly prized in Chinese cuisine and is thought to have medicinal properties.
These are worth maybe $400 a kilo, and depending on market price up in China, but they do go from our Singaporean buyer into Singapore, then distribute out through Australasia.
Tidal Moon produces less than a tonne of product a year. It's still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic and the collapse of markets in mainland China. It needs government grants and philanthropy to survive. But the company is now working with the CSIRO to investigate new and more lucrative markets for medicinal and cosmetic products.
So you want to try to pivot the market towards the Western market and show the health benefits of taking sea cucumber in a capsule, a serum, health and beauty product, something in those lines which more is a Western market.
Michael Weir says the goal is to create a working middle class of Mulgana people. At the moment, most leave their traditional country because there are no jobs or houses.
You've got to create the opportunity. There aren't too many prospects around. There's only, when you talk about class, you're either on welfare or you're rich. There's no middle class. And you have to create the middle class. You can't create it by any means but a free market enterprise. And that's what we're trying to do, is build a big free market enterprise that can trade internationally and attract more Mulgana people back to our homeland.
Just as science on the medicinal qualities of sea cucumbers is incomplete, so too is the understanding of how important the organisms are to the health of seagrass. Shark Bay has the world's largest reserve of seagrasses. Studies in Tanzania have shown that sea cucumbers are vital for the health of seagrass meadows.
They actually fertilise the seagrass meadows, and it's a sort of closed loop. Seagrass meadows grow more, they refertilise, and it just keeps on going. So you get more sea cucumbers and more seagrass.
Marine ecologist Gary Kendrick hopes his research will confirm the same closed-loop relationship in Shark Bay. It's critical, he says, because more than a quarter of Shark Bay's seagrass meadows were lost in a marine heatwave in 2011. Only 10% has naturally recovered. His team from the University of WA's Oceans Institute has been working on how best to restore the lost seagrass. It's vital work, he says, because the exposed seabed contains a vast store of carbon, which can be released to the atmosphere in storms.
So if you disturb the sediments under seagrasses, you're releasing carbon because you're oxygenating the sediment and you're getting enriched breakdown rates from the organic carbon buried in them. The buried carbon in the seagrass meadow is tenfold that of the carbon in a rainforest. So if you measure the rainforest trees and the soils, the carbon buried in a metre of soil underneath a seagrass meadow can be up to tenfold the amount of buried carbon that you find in the rainforest.
The UWA researchers have been working with a local charter tour operator at Monkey Mire on trials to recover the lost seagrass. Sand-filled tubes have been laid on the seabed to stimulate seagrass growth. It's been successful, but progress has been slow. The charter operator Greg Ridgely says he spent his own money and has sponsors ready to expand beyond the trial phase, but he's been unable to get a permit.
We haven't got the licence yet, it's all pending still. We're not interested in making money at all. I wanted to get the grass growing out here. So like the loss of grass affects the dolphins here, their food source, sharks, stingrays, everything depends on the grass. The particular bank we want to work on is probably the best dugong feeding bank on the planet. Well, it was. And we used to go out there and look at dugongs like you'd have 40 or 50 dugongs around the boat. Now you're lucky to have 3 or 4 or 5.
Tidal Moon is also seeking a permit to begin its own restoration work. It has more than $2 million available from mining giant BHP for a 3-year, 100-hectare project with the University of WA. The WA government says it's supporting seagrass restoration trials, but it's made no decision on expanding to the sort of scale researchers say is urgently needed. The government says there's no risk to Shark Bay's World Heritage status.
We lose 1 hectare of seagrasses every 30 minutes globally. And we're planting less than 1 hectare in a year. We're not being effective as, managers of the marine environment. And the work we're doing in Shark Bay is unique because it's actually trying to do everything at scale. We've got 7 months of employment for Indigenous employees to get out there and transplant shoots and to put out socks. What better can you ask for?
If it can get approval, a Tidal Moon restoration team could get more environmental funding as part of an emerging blue carbon market, using seagrass to offset greenhouse gas emissions. It could expand the restoration to thousands of hectares and open the possibility of turning its sea cucumber wild harvest into an aquaculture ranching operation.
What we're doing is creating that human capital so they can actually do both seagrass restoration and sea cucumber harvesting.
It's a big vision, and according to Michael Weir, it can restore the seagrass and build a sustainable business with long-term jobs and economic independence for Mulgana people.
The whole purpose of what we're trying to do is create that middle class, and you can only do it with jobs and employment, training opportunities, so that people can actually gain access into an industry, gain life skills, and they stay away from that vicious circle that Aboriginal people get stuck in.
Next week on Landline, controlling brumbies without culling. How rehoming is working.
I just love seeing the transformation, and I love giving people the opportunity to learn those skills. So, like I could break in a brumby, continuously, and I still wouldn't be able to rehome as many as we can through the camps.
It's pretty amazing what can be achieved in such a short amount of time at the Brumby training camps. That story next week. Now it's time for the Bureau's monthly climate and water outlook. But don't forget, all of the Landline programs for this year are on iView. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.
Welcome to the Bureau's long-range forecast for May to July 2024. First, let's look at recent conditions. April rainfall was above average across parts of northern and eastern Australia. In early April, some areas of Sydney and the Illawarra had flooding after 200 to 300 millimetres of rainfall in 2 days. In contrast, large parts of the country had below average April rainfall, especially in the far southwest. South Australia's rainfall was the 8th lowest on record. Since October, there has been above average rainfall for much of the north this wet season. 4 tropical cyclones crossed our northern coastline, and other monsoonal activity also brought heavy rainfall. April was warmer than usual around most coastlines and much of Tasmania. Some areas had their warmest April on record, including parts of far north Queensland and coastal Western Australia. In contrast, it was cooler than average for a large area inland and into the south. Soil moisture this month has been above average across large areas of the north and east, but below average in some southern areas, especially in Western Australia and South Australia. At the end of the northern wet season, most water storages in the north are full. Some storages in the south are lower than this time last year, including the southwest coast at around 35%. The long-range forecast for the months ahead shows most of Australia is likely to receive lower than average rainfall during May. This may not be so noticeable in northern Australia, where rainfall from May to July is generally less than 25 millimetres. Historically, most other areas have between 10 and 200 millimetres of rainfall during May, so this forecast shows the likelihood that rainfall may be less than usual for this time of year. However, the forecast for June rainfall looks very different to May. The forecast shifts towards some areas having an increased chance of more rainfall than usual in June. Large areas have no strong wet or dry signal and have roughly an equal chance of above or below median June rainfall. The typical range of rainfall for this time of year may be the best guide for these areas. Near median to high stream flow is likely for most forecast locations until June. However, low flow is likely for most sites in Tasmania and in the southwest. While the months are getting cooler, there is still a high chance of above median temperatures across the country from May to July. Let's look at some of the recent influences on our climate. The significant warmth in the oceans continues to be a major feature of the current global climate. Ocean temperatures have been at record high levels continuously since last April. The Bureau will continue to monitor sea surface temperatures in the Australian region as they have a large influence on our climate. In the Pacific Ocean, the El Niño Southern Oscillation has returned to neutral conditions, neither El Niño nor La Niña. In summary, the forecast shows rainfall is likely to be less than usual in May. There's a chance for above average rainfall for some areas in June, and higher than usual temperatures are likely from May to July. You can follow the long-range forecast on the Bureau's website. It's updated regularly with the latest guidance for the weeks and months ahead. You can also select your location on the maps to see more details for your area. Bye for now.